Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at The Avid Reader.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Katharina Volckmer, author of Calls May Be Recorded for Training and Monitoring Purposes, something we've heard lots of times, much to our dismay when we were on hold with Verizon for an hour. So it was published by the Indigo Press, or depending on what copy you have, the $2 radio. So it'll be released here in the States early next month, I believe. Not quite sure. Is it next month, Katharina, or September?
It's September, actually, I believe.
Yeah, Amazon says July, so I'll go
Oh,
double.
all right, okay. Maybe
Who knows?
maybe I'm wrong.
I know. I wasn't sure either. So anyway, Katharina is a writer and journalist in London. Her first novel was The Appointment, which has been translated into 14 or 15 languages and adapted for the stage and radio, which is very understandable if you've read it, because in my mind, it's very cinematic, as is this book. Her work has appeared in LitHub, Astra, and many other publications. So Jimmie goes to work as an alternative to suicide. His job is at a call center where he works for a travel agency, answering silly and somewhat meaningless calls from vacationers who are upset about the oddest and most trivial dissatisfactions with their holidays. He's also a he's also a very obese Italian immigrant with a ridiculous name in his own view, and a monstrous mother, depending on whether we regard Jimmie as a reliable third-person narrator. And his transgressions at work, both personally in the office and virtually on the phone, lead to mishaps, I'm going to say hijinks. And the book weaves humor, sexuality, despair, and oddly, uplifting situations into a skein of a man and a body and a society in which all of those are critiqued, analyzed, and defined by our mores, our judgments, and our own critical biases. Because I found, as in most good books, that I am as involved in the narrative as is Jimmie. And then after you close the book, I'm still with him in a way, which is always a good feeling for me. So welcome, Katharina. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So as a bookseller, as I said earlier when we talked, I'm always interested in covers because, and I say this in every interview, everybody who walks into my bookstore judges books by its cover, opposite of the cliche. So I have a galley, so I have one cover, but the cover that looks like it'll be released in the States is of that blow-up doll. Is that the one that's in the States?
No, that's the one that was used in the UK, and that's originally coming from France. So it's very unusual that a UK publisher uses a French cover. That's probably the first time that's ever happened. And I believe in the US, they're going to have the cover that's on the galleys. So it's a slightly different cover. They didn't want the blow-up doll for the US edition.
That's interesting, too, because they have the blow-up doll on Amazon. Something's weird. Anyway, which one do you like better?
Ooh, it's a good question. I do quite like the blow-up doll, but I also I always respect my editor's decision when they say that something is not going to work in their market, because also the book in some countries was published under the title Wonderfuck, which again, my UK publisher, she said she Googled it and she saw things she'll never unsee. So she said, we're not having that title. So I always trust that they know their audience is better than I do, because I'm, not familiar with them. So
They have to, or otherwise they wouldn't be in business.
exactly.
But that in America, there's so many books that use that word with an asterisk where the U is, and it's just like very popular now. It drives me nuts. Sometimes I won't even stock the book because it's such a silly title given context. But then the second thing I'm interested in always as a bookseller is the epigraph, because that's where the potential reader goes as well. And this one, while morbid, in many situations seems to be true. Why don't you tell us who and what the epigraph is?
So the epigraph comes from a novel by the Austrian novelist Thomas Bernhard, who I don't know how well known he is in the US. He's very well known in Europe, and the epigraph is instead of committing suicide, people go to work, which I just found very suitable for this book because it talks about all the ways in which work can be, painful and humiliating and annoying. But at the same time, I think there are also some positive aspects. But it comes from a novel by Bernhard that I think in English it's called Correction. Yeah. Which, among other things, is actually a novel about being an immigrant in another country. So I think there is also more to it than just the reference to work, like the novel itself. And it always fascinated me because Bernhard himself never lived abroad, but he very accurately, I think, captured what it means to live in a country that's not the country where you were born in. So, but I just always love that line. Instead of committing suicide, people go to work, because I think in many cases that's true. And I've had jobs. I've had a call center job. I've worked at Burger Kings. Those kind of jobs where it's just are mostly awful when you have to go there in the morning.
I, I try not to take for granted the fact that I love what I'm doing. It's funny because in correction, a lot of it takes place in this guy's garret, which is similar to the call center. And also, he's just trying to do something good for his sister, and then it all gets all screwed up.
It does, yeah, it does.
The opposite result of what he intended. So a little bit of reminded me of some of the situations in the book.
And there's also the absurdity because it's the one with the taxidermist as well, isn't it? Where they,
yeah, I know. He's a good taxidermist.
where he spends all his time sort of, obsessing over the taxidermist. But I do think this experience because he's just come back from living in the UK, and I was always fascinated by how well he captured that. But as far as I know, Bernhard never lived in the UK, so I don't really know how he did that. But
sometimes that's better. It's like I'm looking at my books by Nabokov, and I think he was such a good English writer because it wasn't his first language.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
When I was listening to you talking on one of the YouTube about your favorite authors, I was thinking that those authors, your first book, The Appointment, and the one we just referenced, and then the people who interview you always compare you to Kafka, and you're always like, it's a great compliment, which it is. But what is it that you think ties you to all these authors? It's not macabre humor, but it's humor that you wouldn't expect, and also the sexuality that you even talk about when you're discussing the book. That's kind of weird at best and perverse at worst. But somehow it propels the book. It's like sometimes when you read a book, and which your book is also true, and there's comedy and laughter on each page, it's a page turner. Sex and laughter.
Yeah. Two very important things, I think.
Exactly.
But what draws me to these authors, I think there's sort of underlying acceptance as that there are a lot of things in life that are sort of, well, sick and sad, that we have to find a way to deal with that, I think, because most of us, do not commit suicide, but we do the things that we do every day. And I'm quite interested in that space, I think, what it is that actually keeps us going.
Well, before we get into Jimmie himself and his colleagues and partners, if you will, let's talk a little bit about his actual job and what he does every day, because that's the crux of the book.
Yeah, so he works in a call center here in London, and it's a call center for a sort of international booking agent, and he deals with people's complaints mostly while they're on their holidays. And I used to work in a similar place, but part of it was inspired by the fact that I read somewhere on the newspaper that there is a call center here in London. Oh, I don't know if it's in London, but there are people working there who 8 hours a day deal with people complaining about the TfL, which is Transport for London. And I thought, Wow, I don't know how anyone copes with that. And I was so intrigued by that. So I made his job a little worse than my job had been. Um, and there are a lot of things about that I find fascinating. I find fascinating what it means to be invisible at work, but also how we sort of treat these people as our emotional punching balls to deal with the, frustrations that come with capitalism. So yeah, there are a lot of things that interested me about that. And I guess Jimmie sort of, in some ways, does the things that everyone who has a job like that dreams of doing because you know, he stops functioning in the way he's supposed to function, I think.
Did you answer the phone? Thank you for waiting. My name is Katharina.
Yeah, I did. I did. I
Because,
probably did. Sometimes in some places they make up names, but I think I would probably use my own name. But sometimes they make up names because they don't want to be identified.
well, each of those, if you search the book and you search those words, each of them leads to a comic interlude that, if there really were evaluations of Jimmie, he would be fired the first day because everything he says. But, and we could go through them, but some of the best ones, even the first one, no, I know which one. The guy who is complaining because he can't get his photo alone in the infinite pool.
Oh yeah.
And Jimmie says, let's go down to the ocean. He goes, it's not the same. And Jimmie goes, why? Because the sea is finite. So you're laughing. See, I was wondering when I read the book, when you write these things, do you laugh sometimes before you write it down?
I do, and it's really bad. I also sometimes it's the worst is when they're translated back into German. Because also it's a cliche that Germans always laugh about their own jokes. It's like that makes it even worse. But my translator, she's very funny herself, and she sometimes she also makes up her own jokes because some of the jokes won't work in German. But I remember the first time I think it was this book I read it. I was on a train in Germany, and I just burst out laughing, and I was so embarrassed because I was laughing about my own jokes. But I guess there's in a way another thing about because Thomas Bernhard once said in an interview he writes to entertain himself, which I quite like as a sort of antidote to the suffering artist. I quite like the idea of entertaining yourself with your art as well.
Yeah, in one of the interviews, he said, you don't want to find yourself bored with your own writing because that means the reader will be bored as well.
But I think that's true. I mean, I think about that a lot because I know some authors, they sort of find the thing that works and then they replicate that. And their readers also expect them to replicate that. But I
Yeah,
think I'm not interested in doing that.
it's like I think it was a man who called and said, I can't stand that woman in the commercial. And there are so many situations in which I can't stand the woman in the commercial. But the idea of calling up the helpline is so absurd. And
But people do that.
I
Like,
guess yeah.
yeah, people just do the most absurd things. Also, I also think because they're lonely. I think there's also a lot about loneliness, and
Yeah.
because I always wonder why people write reviews for bins and stuff like that. They do.
There's a scene in one of the episodes of South Park, the American television show, when the wife and mother is taking the kids to the park, and she says, "Come on, hon, go to the park with us." He goes, "I can't go to the park. I have to finish this Yelp review."
I love South Park. I always loved South Park.
Yeah, because it's the same as you. It's saying things you can't possibly say, like Curb Your Enthusiasm, yet they say them. And whether it's Mohammed, and they're not scared, and you aren't scared either.
No, because I think it's not a time to be scared.
Yeah.
I think being scared is in a way the worst thing. And I've always liked South Park, and I feel like they're quite on the pulse usually. They're very yeah, they're very good at doing what they're doing, I think.
It's like The Simpsons predicting Donald Trump's presidency 20 years ago, and the wall, but the wall is put up because the Canadians want to block us off.
Yeah, true.
Um, Yeah, one of the other calls was good when the woman finds the hair on the pillow and he asks, "Are you sure it's not yours?" Because I've gone gray several years ago. But yeah, I think that people are lonely, and I think that Jimmie is lone. Well, Jimmie is very lonely in a way, right?
He is, and I think that's why he also has this kind of love-hate relationship with these calls, I think, because he also enjoys talking to these people in a way. Um, and I think it's also about, I'm always fascinated how in London we are, I don't know, 12 million people or something, 10 million, but we're very lonely. People tend to be very lonely and increasingly unable to connect and to be intimate with each other. And I think he's also making all sorts of attempts to connect with people. But I think we're all sort of trying to do that, and we're struggling with that to find these connections with others, even though we're surrounded by other people, every day, but we somehow can't get through to each other often, I think.
Like Jimmie in the first scene on the bus. And
Yeah.
that's about both people and pets.
And it's something that I think it's different in the US, but in London it's so frowned upon to just start talking to people on the bus. It's like unless there is some sort of catastrophe that sort of liberates you from those sort of rules, it's just not possible to just, I mean, if you do, then people immediately think you're some kind of weirdo or you're trying to sell a religion and they'll just walk away. So you can't do that.
Yeah, it's like when you're in an elevator with 10 people going up 50 floors and not a word is said.
Yes.
And if someone does, you think you're going to be mugged or raped.
Yeah, exactly. Or they want to talk about Jesus or something, and you're like, oh, please, please go away. And you immediately have that reaction as well. No, if I'm on a bus here and someone start talking to me, my immediate reaction is just sort of, please don't. You know?
Yeah, that's why I said at the beginning when I closed the book, when I'm walking around now, I think I see things and I go, I wonder what Jimmie would do in that situation. And I think that really is the mark, I think, of a good book is that it carries you. You are carried by it after you finish reading it. That's
Oh,
also
thank
how I
you.
sell books is I tell them you're going to read this book and it's going to change your life or it's going to make you think of things differently. The other the other thing I like is it's not just the calls that are funny, but and I know first of all, some of them are just genius and some are just funny. Like when you say, I wrote down some of the phrases when you say, and they're metaphors, some of them are similes, like an embalmed pope missing toes, or her words smelled of old Tupperware. I read these to my wife and she just laughed out loud, but it's not that they're funny, it's just that they're, how the hell did you come up with them? Like an overdose of processed cheese. You know, where the hell, how did you, I mean, what is that even supposed to mean except I know what it means?
I think it's also some of these, I mean, I guess some of the stereotypes that Europeans have about the English is that they're very unhealthy people and that everything they eat is beige, which is not true. It's a sort of. But I think in Europe, people like to pride themselves on um, yes, being healthier than the English, which I guess in some instances is probably true, but not all the time. But these things just, yeah, they just come to me, I think, when.
It's interesting because I wonder how they translate. And then I was thinking, well, you translate them yourself because you're thinking of them both in German and English.
No, I don't translate myself.
In your mind?
Oh, you mean that? I think
Yeah.
sometimes yes. Most of the time, I think the stuff comes to me in English, but I think there are moments um, where maybe there's certain expression in that comes to my mind first in German or like a word for something. I know that's also a stupid cliche, but sometimes there are words in German for things that, it's more difficult to find a word for in English. So that does happen. Yeah, that does happen. So I guess in a way, sometimes I translate myself in the process, I guess. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, one of the other ones that really hit me simply because I felt the same way as Jimmie did, and yeah, and you spend some time on it is tongue, cow tongue. And I remember when I was a little kid and I went to the supermarket and there were this row of tongues. And my first impression was they are so gigantic.
Yeah.
They're so big. And then you could see the taste buds. And and then the thing you said was, or Jimmie said, was it was like a calf and a mother finally reunited, only separated by different price tags. And it's sad, but it's also, very funny. And that's a lot of what Jimmie is. And also, it's really interesting that you did it in the third person.
Yeah, that was a deliberate choice, I think, because after the appointment, I didn't want to write another first person narrative because that comes very easily and I enjoy doing that, but I wanted that book to be different because I didn't want it to sort of drift back into that voice, even though I enjoyed writing that voice a lot. But in a way, it was also a challenge. I quite like challenging myself sometimes. Um, so yeah, that there were reasons for doing it in the third person, yeah, and still try to get as close as possible to Jimmie's mind, which I hope has worked.
A lot of authors say that's the hardest way to write in the third person. And I can see it. It's difficult to not slip back in to, which reminds me too, when we talked about adaptation of The Appointment. Do you understand what I was saying when I said both of these books are cinematic?
Yeah, I do actually. I do. Because I think also sometimes when I write, I have almost like a theatrical stage in mind. I think certainly for The Appointment, there was throughout the process something that was quite theatrical. Sadly, it hasn't been picked up for the screen yet. I don't know if it ever will.
Well, the thing about it is it both could almost be one person shows, a one man show, a one woman show.
Yeah.
Which,
And The Appointment, I mean, I was very lucky and to have seen it on stage quite a few times, and it I thought it worked very well, actually.
well, I would love to see that. Is that on YouTube?
It isn't. I don't think it is, but I might be able to send you a link to one of the
Oh,
shows, I
wait,
think.
that'd be
Yeah.
okay. So we're trying to sell your book. So what? Well, people, interviewers go, so what's your book about? I'm not going to ask that, but let's talk about who Jimmie is because he's one of the strangest characters I've ever met.
So he's yeah, he's an immigrant. I mean, he came to the UK when he was young, but still he is part of the Italian community here in London. I should always say my partner's Italian. The book is not based on him. He keeps
Jeez.
people keep coming up to him saying, "Oh, that's you," and he said, "It's obviously not me," but Um, but it's a big community here in London, and I've always been interested in the story of that community as well. Um, he's a trained actor, but like many actors, he's currently unemployed, which is also when I was working in the call center, a lot of the people working there were actors or artists, or not I think what people think when they call. And Jimmie has all sorts of issues. He lost the job at a funeral parlor that he really liked. Um, he's overweight, which is also something I'm interested in because that is rarely something that I think is discussed in fiction. I don't know. Um, Overweight people are sort of visible and invisible at the same time, because they don't feature. It's also part of Jimmie's problem. Obviously, he wants to be an actor, but I think there's very little room for actors who don't look a certain way. And so obviously he never makes the cut. But at the same time, if you go outside, here at least you see a lot of people, including myself, who are overweight, but somehow we don't we don't appear anywhere else. Um, and so yeah, he has all sorts of issues. He's in love, but that doesn't really it's not really working out. So yeah.
Yeah. With regard to his sexual orientation, a good portion of the book also turns on lipstick. How did
Mm.
how did you come up with that as being so important?
I think I was interested in, I think I'm always interested in these characters who sort of take a step back and do something slightly, different, and to see what happens. And this was just him one day showing up at work wearing sort of bright lipstick and just sort of not saying anything, but just observing how how people react to that. And I think, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where a man wearing lipstick is something completely normal. It's, I think, in many instances, something that people would find, I don't know, not upsetting, but worth mentioning or paying attention to. So I think he's just very gently, in this instance, pushing sort of some boundaries. Also, I think it's, in a way, his rebellion to being, or against being invisible, because if you have a job like that, it doesn't matter what you look like, because nobody can see you. And they haven't started using sort of screens yet for call centers. That's probably why. But I think he wants to be visible again. I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, and with regard to the lipstick, it also leads to the fact that a good portion of the book takes place in a bathroom.
Mm.
And one of the scenes, which leads to another situation, is the application of lipstick by Helena.
Yeah, that's right.
And Helena is one of those also person who believes she's on the verge of achieving stardom.
Yes.
Like some of the people you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, even though his sexual orientation gravitates towards Daniel, he admires Helena's perfectness, including her bottom, and she admires his lips because soft and pouty, and he has this Cupid's bow. And it's really interesting because, like I said, you wouldn't think this is something that a book could turn on, and yet it does to a great extent. I don't know why it's so poignant, but it is.
Yeah, I think again, I think I'm interested in, because we always think that certain boundaries are non-negotiable or they're set, and I think most of the time they're not really set. And I think he also admires her body because it is so much more perfect than his own, no? And she spent a lot of money on making it just perfect. And I think it's something that for him, I think he sort of finds her attractive in a way, maybe because it's something that's quite unattainable for himself.
But he gets out of it by saying, by that moment of epiphany, when he looks at her nails and he looks at her boot and it's worn, and he looks at her hair, and he gets out of it by saying, she's just like everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, because at the end of the day, I think people are just people, no? But we create an image for ourselves, and she creates it very successfully up to a point. But then I think the curtain comes down, and there's not so much for us to be afraid of, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think Jimmie is able to, and again, and I don't know how he would get by with the evaluation since they are monitored for, but like when he's talking to the shark guy, and he says, "I wonder if your blood is the same shade as my lipstick," and the guy goes, "You freak," and hangs up on. But yeah, all of the calls are calls in which Jimmie finds a certain amount of solace because he can pretty much do whatever he wants, and he does. And a lot of it is really funny, and a lot of it is really telling about the person who's calling. And yeah. So did you ever do that when you were at the call center?
I had two call center jobs, and the first one I had was before I went to university. That was a long time ago, and that was cold calling. That was even worse than what Jimmie is doing. That was like calling people and trying to sell newspaper and magazine subscriptions. And towards the end of it, whenever I called someone and they picked up, I started laughing hysterically. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it anymore. And I had to quit. And it is, I guess, everyone's sort of dream to do that. But also some of the calls that might seem the most absurd are sort of based on some kind of reality. I remember people would ask me out on a date. They would do, all sorts of strange things happen when you're on the phone to people. And also sometimes it's people are at home during the day. People, I mean, there are all sorts of strange circumstances that lead to their phone calls. And yeah, I don't know. And I think the reasons why they're making those phone calls are quite bizarre sometimes as well.
I do Jimmie in reverse. If someone cold calls me, I adopt completely unidentifiable accent. It's like Esperanto. and and then when they ask if the gentleman is there, I said no, he's in the hospital, and I explain his illness, and eventually they just hang up.
But it used to be really bad, the cold calling here, at least. It used to be terrible.
Oh, my mother was scammed because she was,
Mm.
and lots of women in their 80s or 90s, like you said, are in their house. There's no one they interact with. And so if someone's sympathetic and nice to them on the phone, they may very well give them $1,000.
Yes, totally. And again, I think that comes back to the loneliness, you know, because people are lonely, and also I think there is that's slowly disappearing because we can see each other on the phone nowadays. But I think there is a certain intimacy that comes with a phone call as well that is quite, or can be quite special, I think. I also remember the sort of when I was growing up in Germany in the 90s, there was a lot of sort of telephone sex advertisements and things like that. Um, so there is a sort of a fascination with that as well. But obviously nowadays, you know, often when you call people, you can see them, and then that's not the same, you know. But in a call center, you wouldn't be able to see them. So
And you're right about the sex part because, you know, when we were kids, all you had was magazines. And then, like you said, you had the telephone. And now anybody, including an 8-year-old, can just type one word, even on a mistake. And he's bombarded with images so explicit that he wouldn't even be able to know what it was.
exactly, yeah, exactly. But back in the day, there wasn't, you know, there wasn't that much
Yeah.
available.
Playboy magazine, that was it. Or no, the Sears catalog. They simply because the women were wearing their underwear.
And the and oh, and also I remember where I grew up, there was a not a Blockbuster, obviously, but some kind of place where you could take out VHS tapes, and they had an adult section, so you could take out sort of what I assume was pornography. Um, but it was yeah, much more limited than nowadays, I think.
Yeah. It was like going to a pharmacy and having to buy condoms in America, and you would also buy soap and a magazine and bubble gum in order to just hide the condoms. And I'm not just getting, you know, I really have to be here for other reasons.
Is that, but it's, here it's still the same. There's certain products, if you buy them in the pharmacy, they immediately sort of like sort of almost in hysteria stuff them into a bag, you know, so you're not seen with them. And it's
Yeah.
like, it's
If you were,
okay.
if you were buying adult undergarments for your mother, nonetheless, you would be, you know, it would be so embarrassing to buy them, you know, because you would assume that the young man taking your money was thinking, oh yeah, he's incontinent. All right, back to selling your book. This is what I do. Sorry. Um, one of the characters I really liked was his like office mate, if you would, even though it's a cubicle, Wolf, his German.
Oh yeah.
Because you know, for the most of the book, you think actually it's kind of a denouement. For most of the book, you think Wolf is a certain person, and then at the very end, without spoiling anything, you find out he's a completely different person than you thought he was.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that's also the sort of um again, I quite like playing with certain stereotypes that I think people have, or especially Europeans have, and sort of about each other. Um, and also the German-Italian relationship, I think, is quite interesting in many ways because the Germans have a tendency to be quite condescending towards the Italians. And in a way, Jimmie is sort of, you know, taking revenge for that. But yeah, at the end, he turns out to be quite different, which I think is important because stereotypes, they kind of always destroy a person's reality in some way, you know? But at the same time, there's some truth to them, there's some reason why they're there. So I do enjoy playing with those, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because you know Jimmie attributes so many qualities to Wolf that I began to believe that they were true, but only in his head. And then when he asked Wolf about pets, and I think what he had a budgie, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that was also very moving too. And yeah, what was the name of the budgie? It was
Oh, I think he thinks he should have been called Booby or something like,
it's like
yeah.
because I'm Jewish and I had a German friend. She was a client actually in my law practice. She was a lovely lady, Elsa Riskovich, and her husband had died in the war. She was Jewish too. And she asked if I wanted to see a portrait of him. I said, sure. So she took me into the next room. And there was this full length portrait of him, and he looked exactly like Adolf Hitler. And he had this little mustache. It was like, I was so appalled. I was so surprised. I didn't expect that at all. Oh, yeah. And she had a budgie, and its name was Booby. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's what made me think of it. She was,
Oh, that's cute.
yeah, it was. um, so, uh, okay, Wolf. Well, describe the relationship that because it's really an odd one that Jimmie has with Daniel.
Mm. So, well, first of all, I think it's one that has to do with hierarchy because in these places, I think usually one thing that's beautiful about a job like that is that nobody cares about the job, and that gives you a certain, it makes for a nice atmosphere because your colleagues aren't really your competitors. It's just you sort of nobody likes the job and whatever. But Daniel gets promoted, so suddenly he's sort of in charge. So that I think brings with it certain difficulties. And then at the same time, Jimmie has a crush on him or is in love with him and sort of wants thinks he wants to be with him. Um, but Daniel doesn't feel comfortable with that side of himself, I think, not to spoil too many things. But I think it's also, I think Jimmie um, is also an example of how I think sometimes, you start fancying people at work just because you're bored or you have to be there and you sort of have to pass the time and then you kind of, find some eye candy. But I think he does have feelings for Daniel. He does have feelings for him. But I think it's also maybe the situation. I think we sometimes fancy people that we know we can't really have, and there's something about that. And maybe we don't actually want to be with them, but we just like the idea of of fancying them.
I like the way Helena bursts so many bubbles and balloons, like when she's after the incident in the bathroom, and she says, "Yeah, it sounded like pigs in my grand." He sounded just like pigs, and she wasn't saying it in a mean way.
Yeah, and I think it's this thing, how what where sometimes you fantasize about something and you think it's gonna be a certain way. When it actually happens, it's maybe not that nice, It's not what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, and lipstick figured prominently in that situation too. Um,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing, once again, I got caught up with Jimmie because he attributes so many things to Daniel in his private life.
Mm.
And if this book is a book that will be in one of the book clubs we have at work, although everyone is too staid they won't do this book.
Don't
But
want you to lose your job.
no, if I suggested that, yes, there would be people who wrote me letters. Yeah, I get this. It's the same kind of thing. I get the same kind of complaints.
Or
Uh,
you should then channel your inner Jimmie and
oh,
respond.
I am as offensive as Jimmie at work. I kick people out.
Oh,
People,
good.
yeah, people come up and this book is overpriced. I said, okay, what do you want to pay for it? What do you want? And then they go, what do you mean? I said, just whatever you want to pay, just pay it. I don't care. Just get out. $20 if you leave.
But that's I think one thing about this book that people who ever worked in retail or in a call center or something, they can relate to it. People who never had a job like that, they don't, I think sometimes they
Uh,
don't understand it. But anyone who sort of faced the public, they know, I think. Like,
yeah, because people are a pain in the ass generally, I find. And and then some people have a hobby of being mean or being
hmm.
irritating. It's their hobby. It's something they practice, they enjoy doing. And you can see that in the bookstore. Like when they ask for a coffee with, half calf with skim milk and just not too hot, but hot enough with a little bit. And I tell them, look, if you can't order it with 3 words or less, I'm not going to serve it to you. I have the luxury of being able to do that. It's a great pleasure for me.
That is nice. But I think that's also something that I was interested in with this book is people who are actually very comfortable, but their inability to enjoy their lives, right? Because also when people go on holidays nowadays, they
Oh,
always find ways, I think, not to enjoy themselves. And I also think it's something that is a huge taboo, but I think some people don't like going on holidays, and also some people are desperately unhappy when they go on holidays.
especially men who have certain jobs where they feel like if I'm away for a day, so I'm stockbrokers, for example, if something might happen that so they can't enjoy themselves there. Um,
And then
yeah,
they take it out on,
yeah, on their family.
yeah, or the people who work there, or,
Oh, right. Either way, it's very true.
or on booksellers like you. So,
No, no. Yeah, the other thing I do is, my staff really doesn't like me because if I don't have a book, I say, well, just go buy it on Amazon. It's cheaper. Because it's true. I mean, I can't help it. Support your independent bookseller. Okay. Well, if your local hardware store charges you $20 for a garden hose, but if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's, they'll charge you 10, buy it at Home Depot or Lowe's. Just because the reason people come into the bookstore is they like being there. That I understand.
yeah,
I don't see why they should pay 40% more to buy a book from me.
because
Unless
they get your, advice, or they get.
they get the advice. They might find a book that they didn't know they wanted and it might change their life, like this book. Because I'm going to say you need to read this. And otherwise they wouldn't know, except for the cover, which is enticing. But yeah, it's very true. Whatever I just said is very true, but I don't remember what I said. Well, so if we talked about Wolf and we talked about Helena, what about Ellen? She's not that important, but she does serve a purpose in the book.
Oh, the Swedish friend. Yeah, she does. I think she does. Because I think also she often I think she's the only one who tells Jimmie off all the time, no? Because he always comes up with all of his little stories and anecdotes and stuff, and she's just like, just shut up, you know? It's just, um,
She's
and and I think she's also one who's sort of, because I think if you come to a city like London at a certain age, you still think that things are going to happen for you, and they're, you'll sort of move up some kind of ladder and things will get better. And I think Jimmie and Ellen are at a point where they realize that that's just not going to happen for them. It's just life will always be shit in some ways. Like it's always going to be, this. It's not. And I remember that kind of time in your life when you come to terms with the fact that there are certain streets you're never gonna, be able to afford to live there, and or all of those things that you sort of come to realize that this is what your life actually actually is. And I think she sort of, yeah, she represents that in a way. I think this slow realization that you're not going to make it in this city.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I just thought of him as the janitor because Jimmie takes the night shift.
Mm.
The key is like it's almost rail, right? And he needs that key so he can get his hot chocolate or whatever.
Yeah, because these places are so bad that you don't even get like a free coffee or something. You have to pay for your coffee. It's just so exploitative in so many ways. And I think often the exploitation is in the details. Obviously you don't get beaten up or something, but there are these like small details that are quite humiliating and sort of awful and that could be changed very easily, but they don't care about changing them because they kind of want these jobs to be like that, I think.
I like the hoodies, the way the hoodies figure into it. And the fact that if you get promoted, you don't have to wear one.
Yeah, but I think again, anyone who's ever, I remember when I worked at Burger King's, you have to wear that uniform, and that uniform is so horrible, and you sort of
The colors are the worst colors in the world.
colors are terrible. You have to wear that stupid thing on your head, and they're so kind of I don't know, humanizing, and so part of your individuality is obviously immediately gone, and you just stand there and you feel like an idiot. No, I think that's the
It's true.
point.
Because you might be an idiot on the inside, people don't know. But when you're wearing something like that, people know that you're an idiot.
Yeah, they do, and they treat you like one as well, right? So it's and then yeah, and he has to wear some kind of hoodie, and it's horrible, and you don't want to wear it, but you you have to wear it. Or in other jobs, you have to wear makeup, or you have to, they always. I remember when you work in a place like Burger King's, you're not allowed to touch your face, for hygiene reasons. So you kind of, it's a form of being estranged from yourself. That I think it always comes with work to a certain extent, but then sometimes it's more painful. And
Was it as bad for you the way, like in the book, no one can take any breaks? You just can't get up and take a break?
yeah, you have to ask for permission to take a break, like in school, Like, and again, there's something incredibly humiliating for an adult if they're not allowed to just get up and go to the toilet. No, they have to ask and wait and see if, because they can't have a situation where too many people are away at the same time. So, you have to be there. And again, there's sort of this idea that your body is interfering with work. And I think nowadays a lot of workplaces are increasingly hostile towards people's bodies in the sense that they don't want their bodies to interfere in any way with the work that people are doing. So,
Yeah, it's and even those jobs will be taken away by AI, and AI will do a better job than the people who are answering the phones. Then what?
well, they won't be as funny as Jimmie, I think.
Oh, well, the other one was I'm switching around again, but the call where they are not allowing us to be naked here.
Oh yeah,
You had to have laughed on that one.
I did actually laugh about that one. Yeah, because it's the kind of call that people make.
Is it really? I mean, and the other one who calls and says, I know they're not, I know they're talking about me. But yeah, even if they are, if there are or aren't drawn from your experience, you can definitely identify with them. And I also thought, have I made calls like that?
Yeah, you probably have. I don't know.
If you get angry enough, you can pretty much say anything in one of those calls.
Yes, and I think also because the system is obviously so kind of frustrating, and there are all these inbuilt frustrations that by the time people actually get to talk to a person, they're usually in a terrible mood.
And I realize sometimes when I do it, I realize I'm yelling at the person, and then I stop and I go, I'm sorry. I don't mean to be yelling at you. It's not you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm yelling at you. You're not the person who screwed up.
Yeah, it's a system you're yelling at, right? It's the sort of because they're like a fortress. Like some places here are like a fortress, and the only way you can reach them is via the telephone. And for instance, I remember years ago, they had these systems. I guess it's a form of AI where they recognize what you're saying, and then the system responds. But if you had any kind of accent or anything, there was no way they would understand what you were even trying to get your postcode across was impossible. So then that's very painful. So I think the book is also about that, how, the kind of the systems we build are not really there to make anyone feel any better.
Sometimes I wonder why they're there at all. I mean, what purpose does Jimmie serve? Suppose Jimmie wasn't so sarcastic and so insolent with his calls. Their complaints are so trivial that there's still nothing he can do about it. He just has to convince the caller that they're doing the best they can. And he does say that too.
Yeah, he does say that. I think sometimes people want some kind of compensation. They want money, they want to sort of, but I think often they also just want to vent and all because I think some people think they go on holidays and suddenly they'll be a different person. Life will be different. This will fix them somehow. But I think that's not how it works usually. And you just You bring all the things that are sad about your life with you into your holidays, you know? So
I got the writer's hut or whatever it was. See, look at you. You're laughing at your own book.
I know because I just remember that I think that was the real call where someone complained about the sand in the
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not a stretch for a person to actually think that could be me making that call, or that can be me taking the call, which is also what's really good about your books, because even in your little explanation on YouTube, you're saying this is, sexuality in this thing is really out there. But I think people realize, but for the grace of God, there go I. It's like you realize that, yeah, I could be that person if I was just pushed hard enough. And I think that really is one of the messages of the book. But the other thing you have to think about as a reader, and this occurs in lots of books, is what, especially in the third person, is Jimmie a reliable narrator, you know, or not? That's what I was saying about the book club. If we had one, half the people would say he's reliable, and half the people would say he's unreliable, and then they would get into a fight about it.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to be
No,
there for that.
call some of my book clubs Fight Club. But yeah, and so what you tell me, you're not going to answer me, but is he reliable? You don't have to answer that.
I think he is in his own way quite reliable as we all are, right? Because I think that's the problem with being reliable in a sense of if we both walk away from this and talk to people about what we talked about, we'll probably be telling different stories. No? So I think,
Jackass interviewed me, and I don't know what about.
but I do think of him as reliable to a certain extent. He does obviously like telling his stories. Um,
Was he
and that's,
telling?
I think, where Eileen comes in and says, those are just your. But I think there are also stories he tells himself. And I think we all tell ourselves stories to make ourselves feel better about, the fact that we're alive. And so in that sense, I think of him as reliable, but it's obviously all filtered through his quite peculiar mind, I think. But,
Yeah, it's different in The Appointment because it's first person, when she's talking about the Nazis and why everybody in Germany is quiet and those kinds of things. She's real. She's reliable. She just may be completely whacked, but she's reliable because she's saying it.
yeah, no, she is. She is, I think. It's just often a point of view that is not maybe the kind of mainstream point of view that you would find in Germany. But no, yeah, no, she is reliable, I think. Yeah. She just sees things sort of differently.
And that struck home to me because when I was in Germany, I was in Wiesbaden, and I mean, my last name isn't Jewish, and I don't think I look stereotypically Jewish as people stereotype, but people came up to me and apologized. And I said, "You don't have to apologize. You didn't do anything." And but it was several people did. But then I also got nervous because I was at the casino and I was playing blackjack. And in Germany, people can play behind you. So you have to make the right move, because if you don't, you're going to lose and they're going to get very angry at you. So I'm playing up front as a Jewish guy, and there's like 6 Germans behind me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what if I don't have my papers? If I make the wrong move, what's going to happen to me?
Yeah. I hope you are all right.
Yeah, I know. I can play blackjack pretty well. um, so if you've done the appointment first and this in third, what are you working on now that's going to be different?
It's a good question. I'm working on something with I'm hoping it's gonna be um it does play with form in a way that I'm hoping is gonna be interesting. And again, it's quite different, I think, from the first 2 novels. So I'm trying, I'm trying not to bore myself and my readers.
What do you think you'll be, which I hope you'll be, still this person who's writing in a way that's not conventional, instead of writing books like, Gone Girl, you know, or something like that? Do you think you'll still be that Kafkaesque writer?
I hope so. I hope so. I feel like I think I would find it quite hard to write something, I don't want to say normal, but conventional. I feel like there's a sort of a weird part of me that always sort of comes to the surface and is keen to do things differently. So I'm hoping the weird part will survive.
You'd be good at writing short stories.
Yeah, I quite enjoy that too, sometimes. Yeah, I do.
I find that a lot of people in the store don't like short stories, but it's my favorite. I love reading good short stories.
That's really nice. But yeah, usually if you come up to your editor and say, "Oh, I've got short stories," they're like, "Please just,
Oh, they don't
drown yourself in the loo or something," because it's like because they're considered. And I mean, I feel like every few years there's the occasional sort of short story collection that does really well, but generally they're very frowned upon. Sadly, I think. But
Yeah, I agree. Well, I guess I guess neither of the books, and I mean this neither as a compliment or an insult, is they're not plot driven
mm.
so at all. So are you, I don't want to keep pushing you, but you're saying you don't know if you could write a normal book, which I think is a perfectly good word to use. Do you think you'll ever write a book in which there's, boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl?
I find that very boring, personally. I don't also really enjoy reading that either, because I find that quite dull. But personally, I mean, I don't want to insult any of my fellow writers, obviously, but I don't much enjoy reading a narrative that doesn't break at any point. I think it's interesting to break things. Yeah.
Well, it's like even in your acknowledgments, who are you thanking about? Who are you thanking about something with James Joyce? There was someone in there you thanked about James Joyce.
Oh, Adam, for letting me read from Ulysses. Yeah.
Because, and you also talk somewhere about just listening to people. I think listening to people when you're out and about, you get the best dialogue you could ever get, much better than you could write. And James Joyce, when he wrote Ulysses in the Nighttown episode, he did what I do sometimes is just go to a bar, sit there and just write down what people are saying. And it's
Yes,
great.
and I think I've been thinking about that a lot. And I also think if you're a foreigner in a country, you listen even more intently. There's a different way of listening, because I sometimes just get lost in other people's conversations. And there's always that part of the thing, because other people's conversations always sound kind of stupid. No, you always think, oh God, these people are so moronic. But then you're sort of fascinated. And I sometimes really get really lost in other people's conversations.
Yeah, I remember one where I was sitting at a bar and this like soccer mom in America talking about, well, my son can't get into this camp. And well, you know how she is. And that was it. And I thought, well, that would work, right?
That would work, yeah. Yeah. So I think it's good practice to go out there and listen to the way also, because obviously a dialogue is always something artificial, no? You can't really get away from that, but to go out there and listen to people, I think it's a good thing to do.
The whole idea of a book is about a doctor between someone's legs. I mean, who else is going to think of that? And then you could call that dialogue, but he only is in there every once in a while. It's like a psychiatrist, go on.
Yeah, that's true. But he is there. It's important that he's there. But yeah.
Yes, it's important that he's there. Exactly. Well, this has been great. I could go on and bother you some more, but I really enjoyed talking to you and I really enjoyed the book. And
thank you so much. Yeah, it's been really nice talking to you.
so I look forward to the next one. We'll see what it's like.
Yeah, I hope you'll like it.
Okay. Talk to you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.